Well, I was exercising my Second Amendment freedoms here in the People's Republic of California last Sunday, and an event happened up there that is something I think we probably should talk about up at the gun range. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott, and this is your Right Angle Show brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. Well, gents, it's a fairly popular gun range. I decided not to name them because this happens pretty much everywhere. But we were up there at the range and we were checking in. There's a big long line of people. It was Sunday afternoon on Labor Day weekend, and we're just standing in line kind of joking. Finally, we get to the front. We're members, so we were able to rent a 9mm for a guest of ours who was coming. And then we decided, do we want to go over to where the metal targets are? Do we want to go to the paper targets? This guest was an FBI agent and knew how to shoot very, very well. He was instructing a friend of his, and we decided let's go to the paper targets because that way you can see where you miss. By the way, this FBI agent took one shot with the 9mm he's never held before and nicked the top of the one on the circle. He said he was going to try and nick the top of the one. That's what he did. Just boom.
Oh,
But put put that aside for a second. So we're loading our weapons and we're getting ready to go. And all of a sudden, the range safety officers call out ceasefire in the little bay we're in, call out ceasefire in the bays next to us. Next thing you know, calling out ceasefires everywhere, which I'd never seen before. And then an ambulance arrives, followed by a fire truck, followed by a police car, followed by another police car, followed by two more police cars, and so on. And as the dust essentially settled, we found out that somebody over in the metal target area had gone up to the gun range in order to commit suicide and had shot themselves, but they're expected to survive. I don't want to do too much of this, this touchy-feely stuff coming after what we talked about with addiction last week.
yeah.
But I think since this actually did happen, I think it's something we need to talk about. So, because there are people out there who need to hear the message. And I've talked about this issue before a few times, and it has made a difference in a few people's lives. So if you're one of those people that are filled with that kind of despair, please stay with us, because this is for you and about you, and if you think it's going to be a scolding, you're mistaken. So these things happen at gun ranges frequently enough for it to be not a gigantic surprise. I would imagine 2 or 3 times a year in a popular gun range. Steve, my first thought, of course, is that the second that this becomes news, the left is going to get a hold of this, and they're going to say, well, look, you can just walk onto a gun range and rent a gun? Yes, that's right. Yes, you can. With a proper state ID, you can, in fact, driver's license, you can rent a gun. Well, that just makes it a suicide factory. There's no mental test. There's no psychological test for the people coming out on the gun range. They can simply rent a gun, go out there and shoot themselves. Yes, that's actually pretty much it.
Yeah.
And my response to this, Steve, would be to say, if you're one of those people that thinks there should be a fairly rigorous psychiatric and mental health background check prior to going to the gun range, well, then to follow the logic of that, certainly you should have to have a psychological check and probably a background check before you're allowed to go to the number one suicide spot on planet Earth, which is the Golden Gate Bridge. So certainly we can't let any pedestrians go across that bridge without a series of severe questions and a series of background checks, mental health tests, and so on. So I just wanted to get that out of the way because I can hear where I know where the fire's coming from in these particular things. So let's start with this. Is there anything that the owner of that range could have realistically done to have prevented this situation?
No. Gosh, you mentioned the Golden Gate Bridge. I spent a couple of years living in San Francisco and 4 more years in Northern California. I can't tell you the number of times I've driven that bridge, and it is an engineering marvel that sits atop some of the most beautiful real estate in the entire world, and I can understand why that would be a suicide destination, because why wouldn't you want to spend some of your last moments in some of the most amazing and beautiful stuff to be found anywhere? What I can't imagine would be then actually following through on it, because to see what God or nature can do and to see what man can do with that bridge, how would you not want to go on? But that's to really slight the situation that people find themselves in. I've been at a couple of really dark places. I hate to get personal. I think this is 3 weeks in a row now.
No,
but there was a time.
we need to.
Yeah. There was a time I was 14, 15 years old. My mom, who I'd never even really seen very drunk, told me she was checking herself into drug rehab, while she was in drug rehab. My dad died of a long-term heart condition. She had to get permission to leave rehab just to go to the funeral. This is the kind of situation this was. And then, a few months later, as a part of her not recovering, disappeared off to California. I had no idea where she was, without a word. So there was a period of weeks where I literally did not, here I go again, where I literally did not know whether or not I'd been orphaned, which is a terrible burden to put on a 15-year-old. But I got through that in major part because of the love of my grandfather, my dad's dad. You got to find that. You got to look for that. And it wasn't just his love. He was very firm with me. He was strict. These are the things a kid like that needs. And in a sense, I don't know if you need to find it from your God, your family, whatever, but you got to find that, and you got to hold on to it, and it will hold on to you back.
We'll have some suggestions about that in a minute. Scott, I know your life has changed enormously since you became a Christian, and that you become basically an entirely different man than the person you used to be. Virtually everybody watching this episode will not be able to understand the kind of psychic pain you can be in for such a depth and for such a degree and for so long, that the natural will to live that is built into everybody is overwhelmed by this, and you've decided that you're going to take your own life. Nobody who has had a healthy childhood and a relatively healthy life, even suffering enormous catastrophe, death of a child, they don't go to this place because they have emotional equipment that many people just simply didn't get. They just didn't get it, and they never had it, and they probably never will. The person who ended up shooting themselves was probably one or two people in front of me in the line, or one or two people behind me in the line. And I was there with friends, and we were all joking and waiting to get out there, and so was everybody else. This person must have been sitting there with an internal blood rate of 210 over 180, trying to decide whether they're going to have the guts to go through with what they're about to do. And to people who say it's an act of cowardice, I would say it's certainly an act of abandonment, but it takes a certain amount of courage to do what you did. I don't think it's noble, and we'll get to that in a second too. But I guess here's what I'm asking you, Scott. That hopelessness, and this is from personal experience, that hopelessness, I think, comes from a place of not only being in terrible distress, but being in terrible distress and thinking that there is never going to be an end of this distress. There is no way out. It's not going to change. That's what takes people into from the realm of severe dark depression into actual suicide, is the belief that it's never going to change. It can't change. That's the way it's going to be. What do you have to say about that?
I think you can be horribly alone in the midst of a crowd. I think a lot of people think that a person who commits suicide is doing it as a solution to a problem. I think you're more accurate, Bill. It's not. It's just a way out of the loop. I don't think I don't think necessarily a person who commits suicide is thinking, well, this will fix it. I think they're just thinking it'll end it. It'll just end it. Yeah, it'll just.
That's right.
The circle, the vicious loop, and most of us have probably experienced, and usually in adolescence, of feeling like this is the most horrible thing that can ever happen to me. And for some of us, frankly, it seems a little shallow in hindsight. And you go, oh yeah, she broke up with me. You know, that was the devastating thing that I thought I could never feel much worse ever. And so we have some sense of what it feels like to sort of flit through that mental state. What we don't have a sense of is what it feels like to be imprisoned by it. To be captivated by it, and to feel like there is no way out. And I guess I would say a couple of things. One is you don't realize how devastating an impact your loss is going to have on a lot of people. And oddly enough, that thought is the answer for many people's problems, because the reality is there are a lot of people who care deeply about you. There are a lot of people who would mourn you deeply, who would wish they had said something else and done something else, who would beat themselves up for not having noticed.
And who would come to your aid right now if they knew. In many
Immediately.
cases.
Absolutely.
Immediately, yeah.
Come flying,
And
if
not only
necessary.
that, there are more people than we realize who have also been in such a place themselves, and they don't walk around, blurting it out in public gatherings or private conversations, because for them it was a very painful experience. And so I know it may sound trite, but you really are not alone. There are lots of people who, whether they've been through something like that before or whether they can just have empathy with somebody who's going through such a time, are there literally for you, and who will do anything they can to lift you up and to encourage you and to pray for you and to serve you and to help you. And then there's another side of that which you may not see now, because the real reason that most people find to live, and the reason why I get up every morning, is that I have a purpose. There's something I feel I want to accomplish. And I think you can get to a point in life where you feel like your life has no purpose. And what I'm saying is, your purpose may be to strive through and survive this desperately dark time so that you can be a help to someone else, so that you can turn another person's life around, so that you can really make a difference for somebody. And so I'm not just saying that there are other people who want to help you. I'm saying that you're going to help other people. Stick around for that, will you?
Yeah. If you decide to save your own life now, it is entirely possible. In fact, in many cases, I would say it's likely that you will end up having lived a life where you saved the lives of many other people. I certainly know that I'm an example of this. When I first, this is for those of you who are feeling this kind of pain. For those vast majority of the people watching this who have not been through this kind of pain, I would just simply ask you to show maybe more compassion than you might be inclined to, because I can assure you that the pain that these people are experiencing is well beyond anything that you personally have experienced. Well beyond. It's not, gee, I had a bad day too and I didn't kill myself. You just have to understand that this is unbearable torment that drives people to this kind of action. So let me say a couple things to you. First of all, what Scott said is so true. You have no idea how far the tendrils of your life exist, how far out they go. You just don't know. You certainly underestimate it. Somebody's got a crush on you. Somebody did or does. I was writing my little blog, Eject, and somebody, after about a year of writing these little essays that I didn't think anybody was going to read, said that somebody had seen a truck on the Blue Ridge Parkway in North Carolina that said, read Eject, Eject, Eject. Somebody had gone out and made a bumper sticker for my blog, put it on their car, and it was driving around in the hills of North Carolina, which absolutely blew my mind. And it convinced me, as it always does when I feel like, what's the point of this? Honestly, they're cutting the views down, our viewership is down, the shadow banning, I get it all the time, Membership numbers are down, all of it. And I've been working on other projects, all of this. It's like, what's the point, really, honestly, what's the point in this? And then I'll go to some event and I'll have people come up to me and say, thank you, and thank you for what you do. Now, I know you may be thinking, well, you're a famous guy and stuff. I am a slightly famous guy. If I'm a celebrity, that's just an indication of how low the bar is set on the conservative side of things. But let me say this to you, if you haven't heard this before. From the time I was probably 14 or 15, up until I would say probably my late 40s, I was extremely, extremely emotionally distressed individual. I spent better part of 3 decades absolutely broke. I mean, having your power turned off every month broke. I didn't have 4 figures in a bank account consistently until I was 47, 48 years old, that I could consistently say I have $1,000 or more in my bank account. All this time working as a limo driver and doing all these other jobs, I'm working for people who seem to be getting younger and younger, but I'm just getting older and older. And they're moving on with their lives and they're becoming movie producers and businessmen and all the rest. And I'm holding their luggage, or I'm cutting a show for somebody who's half my age and soon going to be a third my age. And I remember as clearly as I am aware of things right now, that I was driving home after a late night edit session. It was about 2:45 in the morning. It was the year 2000. I was driving my 10-year-old Ford Escort, by myself to my home where I live by myself. And I remember having this thought hit me so clearly, and the thought was, Bill, you're a guy with a great future behind you. You're a guy who really had the ability to do something special, and you just missed. You wanted to do films, you wanted to be a fighter pilot, you gave it your best shot, but you just missed. And most people miss, and that's the way it is, and get used to it. And then 2 years later, these things happened that completely changed my life. So if you're one of those people that see yourself in this situation, let me just say one last thing to you very briefly. The cause of the greatest despair comes after you have made an attempt to get out of it, and you've done something, and then you get the same results. In other words, you think you know what the problem is, you work on correcting it, and then the same thing happens again and again and again and again. Maybe the relationship ends for the same reason that all of the relationships have ended, and you begin to realize, no, I'm just broken, that's all there is to it. It's just broken, and it's not ever going to change, and there's nothing I can do about it. Well, it's just not true. The people who wrote to me during the eject days, and then during the PJTV days, and now during these days, the people I meet made me into the kind of person that I am today. I wasn't this person. I wanted to be, but I wasn't. And their support made me the kind of person to attract the kind of woman I ended up married, who made me fully human. And I never saw that one coming either. I was a bachelor till I was 57. You don't know what's coming for you. You don't know how not how fast, because it took 10 years, but how much a life can turn around. And you won't know what you've missed if you miss it. So don't miss it. So here's some practical advice for you from a person who's been there and who knows from first-hand experience about this. If you have the courage to be thinking about going someplace, renting a gun, and pointing it at your head, or jumping off of a tall building, because that is not an act that is done easily, then certainly right at this moment, in the middle of all this despair, you must be thinking, yeah, well, that's him. And if you have the courage to be thinking this through, and you need to have the courage to do one thing, and that is find out where the nearest Narcotics Anonymous or Alcoholics Anonymous meeting is today. And whether you have a drinking problem or a drug problem or not, and maybe you don't, go to that meeting today. Now. Go now. And they're in every single neighborhood in the country. Find one. And for God's sake, just for me, please, when you go to that meeting, do what many other people do. Just stand up and say, my life feels absolutely worthless, and I'm seriously thinking about killing myself. Please have the courage to do that. That takes more courage probably than pulling the trigger, I think. But it's what I had the courage to do, is to go and get help from people and tell them that I needed it. And you will not believe it. Literally, it's not a rhetorical phrase. You simply will not be able to believe the amount of instant support that you will receive from a group of grateful recovering drug addicts or alcoholics or whatever the case may be. If you go to a meeting like that and you stand up and say, I'm really seriously considering killing myself, you will find a number of people who will immediately step forward and take personal responsibility for you not doing that. That is a profound experience, to be convinced that people you've never met before genuinely care about you, that it's not a PR trick and they're not getting paid for it. They genuinely care. It's probably what kept me from going down the road that you may be going down now. Just having people care about me who I never met before, and believing them that they cared about me. And they cared about me because there had been some point in their lives when they'd gone into a meeting and said pretty much the same things that I'd said. And people they'd never met before came forward and took care of them. And they can't pay those people back. They can't pay them back for having saved their lives. I can't pay back the people who saved my life. There's no way I can pay them back. But I can pay it forward. And you will find that you will immediately find a number of people who will take a personal, daily, and hourly, if necessary, interest in you and your life. Because everybody here on this planet is unique. 100 billion galaxies with 100 billion stars each over the cause of eternity, backwards and forwards through time. There's only one of you. And that may sound very trivial, or it may sound very silly, but it's a fact. You're unique. And with the country and a world that we're in today, we need everybody. Scotty got it just right, as did Steve. It may be your destiny to save a life, several lives, hundreds of lives, thousands of lives. I'll just close with this. A number of people get killed in war, and a number of people are injured in war. And the number of veterans that commit suicide is the highest among our population. It's the greatest disgrace we have as a nation, and that's a separate issue. But there was one ranger who went over, I want to say it was 2006, I'm not sure about that. And he was in a Humvee leading his convoy. He was a sergeant, leading his rangers through patrol in Baghdad. And he was in one of the up-armored Humvees, but he decided to go in the lead unarmored Humvee because he thought his new guys would be safer in the old armored one. So they went out on their patrol, and as they're coming back from their patrol in Baghdad, they drove over an IED, which detonated. It was 250 millimeter artillery shells. It blew this guy something like 100 yards through the air. And it was fused by liquid propane. So when my friend got up, he saw the smoking ruins of his vehicle and started to run towards his friends, his fellow soldiers. And he was so in the moment that he didn't realize that he was completely on fire. He was just on fire. He ran far enough to get to the Humvee and realized that his other people in the car had been killed, and then he went down. And his name is Mike Schlitz, and Mike Schlitz is the most severely wounded person I've ever seen that survived. When I first saw Mike Schlitz doing a show for PJTV, I remember thinking to myself, you're going to have to force yourself to look right at this guy and look him in the eye, because his head looked like a bowling ball that was covered with scar tissue. His nose had been burned off. His ears had been burned off. His eyelids had been burned off. His hands had been burned off. Mike Schlitz was in a medically induced coma for many weeks. And when he woke up and saw the extent of his injuries and how badly he'd been burned, he wanted to kill himself. Who wouldn't? Really, I mean, really, who wouldn't think that? But he didn't, because he wanted to live long enough to see his unit come home. And so he toughed it out, and a great group of people called Veterans Airlift Command rented a special airplane and got him there. And when his unit came back from Iraq, Mike was standing, he wasn't standing there. I know this is long, but it's worth telling, because Mike Schlitz was ready to kill himself. But Mike Schlitz hung in there, and what happened was when he got to the ceremony where his unit was coming back, he was in the back of an airplane that had to have a cargo bay because he was in a hospital bed, and he couldn't get up. And because all of his skin had been burned off, his skin was extremely sensitive, and it was snowing at the location where the unit came back. So as they're taking Mike down the ramp, all of his men and his friends clustered around the bed and made a human umbrella over him to keep the snow off of his skin. So Mike was there when his unit came back. And I don't feel pity for Mike Schlitz at all, because Mike Schlitz doesn't need my pity, and he certainly doesn't act like it. He is a ranger. He's a kick-ass American son of a bitch. And Mike Schlitz now goes around the country talking to people who've suffered enormous wounds, helping to raise money for them. And Mike Schlitz was hurt far worse than you've been in terms of physical. He turned his life from absolute despair and suicide into a role model for me, for everybody who's ever met him. He's one of the greatest men that ever lived. I admire him beyond my ability to say, and all that happened to him was he got blown up in a car one day. You don't know what's waiting for you. You don't. You think you do. I know you think you do. When you're so deep in the pit, you can't see out of the pit. You think it's nothing but pit. It's not. There is a bottom to the pit, and there's a top to the pit. And it's your job to get through today, or maybe just get through this next half hour. That's really all you have to do, 5 minutes at a time. If you don't think you can make it through the day or the night, just make it through till the next hour, and then try to do another hour. But for God's sakes, go find an AA or an NA meeting and go in there, and instead of just sitting there quietly, have the courage to tell people what you're feeling. There will not be a second's worth of judgment, and you will be so overwhelmed by the genuineness of the emotion from other people who are exactly where you are now and have been exactly where you are now. And their desperation to save you will be driven by the fact that their lives were unmanageable and bleak and suicidal, and they didn't kill themselves, and now they're happy or happier. And that's what's going to drive them to take care of you and drive you to take care of somebody else when you get past this. Don't do it. And if you're thinking you're going to hurt somebody else, if you're trying to hurt somebody who hurt you by doing it, you're going to hurt the people who love you much more than whoever it is you're really shooting at. And every life is worth saving, and yours especially. And I ought to know, because like I said, for most of my life I was a guy with a great future behind me who really thought that the whole thing was over and had missed the boat. And now I'm talking to you, and there's a reason why I'm talking to you. The reason I'm talking to you is because I sometimes had to do it an hour at a time, but I kept doing it, and now I live this fabulous life with my own company, and I'm married to the most wonderful person in the world, and none of this would have happened if I hadn't gotten that help on November 7th of 1985. So please do that. That'll do it for this edition of Right Angle. If there's anything I personally can do for you, you can reach me at info@billwhittle.com, and I'd be happy to talk to anybody who's feeling that kind of desperation. It doesn't last forever, and there's a way out of it, and we can help you find it. We'll see you next week on Right Angle.